I have to say it's really exciting to be here because usually I work with either online records post-pandemic, but usually paper or parchment, and to see a physical object from that time period, having it right in front of me, is really exciting. But this was created around the middle of the 17th century. And this was a period in England in particular where there was lots of change. There was lots of excitement as well in terms of new inventions. And as we get to the 1660s, we see the establishment of the Royal Society. So people were wearing these watches alongside other new things like periwigs and other gadgets and things as an expression of wealth, status, but also, you know what it's like when there's something cool and interesting that's being made, you kind of want one as well. And I think these watches symbolise that a lot because they weren't always necessarily true to time, particularly around the time that this watch was created. It has just an hour hand, not a minute hand, but it was an exciting thing for people to have. I work with Samuel Pepys's diaries quite a lot, and he mentions watches sporadically throughout the spread of his diaries in the 1660s. A few times he mentions just having one or buying one. Other times you get more of an insight into how he actually uses the watch as well. We do know that in 1665, so in May 1665, he talks about having a watch with a minute hand as well. He refers to it as a minute watch, and he uses that to time himself walking from Woolwich to Greenwich. And he notes in his diary how he's always within 2 minutes each day, each time he does that. So we've got that from Samuel Pepys, but it's said in his diaries in the same kind of context as him having other new things. Like he'll talk about buying new books from St Paul's Walk, for example, or going to events at the Royal Society, seeing dissections. So it's within that kind of world of newness, and that's where we see these references from Samuel Pepys. So with Samuel Pepys, he references using a minute watch, and he references this on the 13th of September in 1665. He says, "Up and walk to Greenwich, taking pleasure to walk with my minute watch in my hand, by which I am come now to see the distances of my way from Woolwich to Greenwich, and do find myself come within 2 minutes constantly to the same place at the end of each quarter of an hour." So you can see the excitement that he has in using this new gadget of his. But then also he talks about the pitfalls of having a watch, just much like we have our iPhones now that we seem to be kind of linked to umbilically almost. He was feeling the same kind of feelings when it came to watches. He said on the 13th of May 1665 about his minute watch, "Childishness hangs upon me still that I cannot forbear carrying my watch in my hand in the coach all this afternoon, and seeing what o'clock it is 100 times, and am apt to think with myself, how could I be so long without one, though I remember since I had one, and found it a trouble, and resolved to carry one no more about me while I lived." I think that's really interesting because it chimes with, pardon the pun, but it chimes with what we feel now a lot of the time, people saying that they're going on social media breaks and breaks from technology. And I think he was feeling those same things about his watch, these new gadgets, which are beautiful, by the way, and would have been adorned with lots of enamel imagery and would have been made of gold and different materials. But he enjoyed it, but it was also somewhat of a bane of his existence as well. There was lots going on in terms of thinking. So we're at a really transitional period, the 17th century, where people are experimenting and coming up with ideas, experimenting, and then devising theories based on their experiments. So we've got so many leading figures here and well-known names to science like Isaac Newton, Robert Hooke, conducting experiments to see how things work. So this goes from mechanical objects, particularly Robert Hooke, he was interested in everything, to looking at the body and understanding how cells work, for example. So there's lots going on, but it's not just based in England, it's across It's across Europe. There's a network of letters. So while the Royal Society was established in London in 1663, we've also got equivalent societies in France, and then communication with leading thinkers in the Netherlands as well. One of my favourite figures during this period is a woman called Margaret Cavendish, she just loves all of this excitement. She's one of the only women to have been allowed into the Royal Society up until, I think, Queen Victoria. But sadly, I think she was only invited because she had funds to fund more of their experiments. But you can see the excitement about these new ideas in her works and in the works of so many others as well. One of the loudest sounds that people would have heard in the 17th century would have been church bells. That would have been the loudest sound in a community, and they would ring out hourly, sometimes half hourly as well, so that people could be aware of what time it was. But when these pocket watches came into play, they had chimes of their own. So just like in the 90s, 1990s, early noughties perhaps, when people were starting to get pagers and phones, and they made sure that they had the sound on, so everyone knew that they had a pager or a phone. I can imagine that the chime from your pocket watch, having this little kind of bleat come out of your pocket, would have been kind of a quiet statement of your wealth and status in society. So it would be somebody that could afford to pay for it, because these weren't cheap items to own. So that's the first thing. It would usually be a man, although I do have a vague memory of Samuel Pepys referencing that his wife was given a watch by him. So if anyone's watching this and wants to find out, his diaries are online, so you can have a little dig. You can either prove me wrong or right with that one. But yes, primarily it would be men that would be wearing these watches, because they could put them in their pockets. And it was to do with the new styles of dressing that people had. So in the 1660s, Charles II brought in what would be the precursor to the three-piece suit. It's quite an iconic look. It's that jacket, but in the late 17th century it was longer. The trousers were shorter, but there was a waist jacket as well. So it kind of ties in with that. They'd also be wearing these grand periwigs, which had practical purposes. Obviously you could shave your head and avoid getting lice, but they would wear them over and over again, and I think they would end up just wearing them more like hats than wigs that we would recognise today. In fact, if you go a bit further into the 18th century and you look at the work of William Hogarth, you can see lots of figures wearing these periwigs, and they're kind of askew. But in any case, watches would have been bought by people that had means, people that wanted to show that they had some kind of status in society, and people that were on the make. So I do think Samuel Pepys is a really good example of that.